I was about to sign my $2.5 billion company over to my son when my phone buzzed with a message that shattered my world. Don't sign anything. Phoenix is not your son. Unknown number. My pen froze above the signature line. Phoenix looked up from across the mahogany desk, his eyes bright with anticipation, eyes that suddenly looked wrong in ways I'd never noticed. Dad, is everything okay? For 12 years, since his miraculous recovery from that car accident, Phoenix had been my pride and joy, my heir, my only family. We'd rebuilt our relationship from scratch after I thought I'd lost him forever. But now, staring at this man I'd called my son, one terrifying question echoed in my mind. If Phoenix wasn't my son, then who had been living in my house for over a decade? The signature could wait, because I was about to uncover a deception so twisted, so calculated, that it would make you question everyone you trust. This is the story of how I discovered that love can be the most dangerous weapon of all, and how I fought back using the only thing more powerful than deception, the truth. If you've ever wondered whether you really know the people closest to you, you need to hear what happened next. Because what I found hiding behind my son's face will change how you look at your own family forever. My name is Zachary Montague. At 75, I should be enjoying my twilight years on our family ranch outside Austin, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold. Instead, I'm telling you about the day I discovered that the man I'd loved as my son for 12 years was a complete stranger, and possibly something much worse. Montague Energy Holdings represents 4 generations of Texas grit and determination. My great-grandfather struck oil in the Permian Basin in 1923 with nothing but borrowed equipment and unshakable faith. My grandfather expanded into natural gas distribution across the Southwest. My father took us international. I brought us into the renewable energy revolution. By 2012, we were worth $2.5 billion and employed over 3,000 people across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. It wasn't just a company. It was our family's legacy, built on handshake deals and the kind of integrity that made our word as valuable as any contract. Phoenix had been everything to me, my only child after my wife Margaret died in 2004. Smart, ambitious, and blessed with the kind of natural business instinct that can't be taught. He'd graduated from UT with degrees in petroleum engineering and business administration. By age 28, he was already being groomed to take over operations. Then came March 15th, 2012, the day that changed everything. Phoenix had been driving back from a site inspection in Midland when his truck was found abandoned on a remote stretch of Highway 349. No signs of struggle. No ransom demands. No body. The investigation consumed months of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars in private detective fees. The police classified it as a missing persons case with suspected foul play. I knew better than to hold on to false hope, but a father never stops looking for his child, even when the trail goes cold, even when everyone else gives up. For 6 months, I lived in a gray fog of grief and uncertainty. The company continued operating. I had excellent managers, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I was just going through the motions, waiting for answers that might never come. Then, on September 23rd, 2012, Phoenix walked through my front door. "Dad?" His voice was different, hoarser, more hesitant. "I'm home." The man standing in my entryway looked like Phoenix, but something was off. His face was thinner, marked by what appeared to be recent scars. His posture was different. Even his smile seemed foreign. "The doctor said I might not remember everything at first," he explained when I questioned the changes. "Head trauma from the accident. It's affected my memory, my speech patterns, even some of my mannerisms." The relief of having him back overwhelmed any doubts I might have harbored. My son was alive. Damaged, perhaps, but alive. The details could be sorted out later. Over the following weeks, Phoenix gradually shared fragments of what had happened. He'd been kidnapped by men involved in illegal oil speculation, criminals who'd mistaken him for someone with access to insider drilling information. When they realized their error, They'd beaten him severely and left him for dead in a ravine. I spent months in a coma in a small-town hospital, he told me. When I finally woke up, it took more months of rehabilitation before I could even remember my own name clearly. And the story explained everything. The physical changes, the memory gaps, the subtle differences in personality that I attributed to trauma. I was so grateful to have him back that I never questioned the inconsistencies. Phoenix threw himself into relearning the family business with remarkable dedication. Within a year, he'd mastered details about our operations that had taken me decades to accumulate. His insights into market trends and regulatory changes were often brilliant, almost supernaturally perceptive. It's like starting fresh, he'd say when I complimented his rapid progress. Sometimes losing your past helps you see the future more clearly. Our morning routine became sacred again. Coffee in my study at 7 sharp, reviewing overnight reports and planning strategy. Phoenix would settle into the leather chair that had always been his favorite, and we'd discuss everything from drilling techniques to environmental regulations with the easy familiarity of a true father-son partnership. The succession planning had been his idea. "Dad, you've carried this burden alone for too long. Let me take the weight off your shoulders." I'd resisted initially, not because I doubted his abilities, but because formally, passing control felt like admitting my own mortality. Eventually, Phoenix's persistent and loving arguments wore down my resistance. "This company is your legacy," he'd said just last month, "but it's my future. Trust me to honor what you've built while taking it to places you've never imagined." The legal documentation had taken months to prepare. Complete ownership transfer, effective upon my signature, Phoenix would become sole owner and CEO of Montague Energy Holdings, with full authority to make strategic decisions about our $2.5 billion enterprise. Everything had been perfect, until that text message turned my world upside down. I stared at those 8 words until they burned into my retinas. "Don't sign anything. Phoenix is not your son." My first instinct was to delete the message and dismiss it as some kind of cruel prank. But something about the timing, arriving at the exact moment I was about to sign, felt too deliberate to ignore. "Dad, you look pale." Phoenix leaned forward, concern creasing his features. "Maybe we should take a break?" "Just give me a moment, son." The word son felt strange in my mouth now, weighted with sudden uncertainty. I studied his face as if seeing it for the first time. The bone structure was right. Strong jaw, prominent cheekbones, the Montague nose. But the eyes? When had Phoenix's eyes changed from the warm hazel I remembered to this cooler brown? "Actually, there is something I wanted to discuss," I said, making a split-second decision to test the waters. "I've been thinking about that camping trip we took to Big Bend when you were 16. Do you remember what you said about wanting to study geology?" Phoenix's expression didn't change, but I caught the slightest pause before he answered. "Of course. That was the trip where I decided I wanted to understand the Earth as well as you understood business." My blood chilled. We had never taken any camping trip to Big Bend. The memory I'd described was completely fabricated, a test to see how he'd respond. But Phoenix had answered with such confidence, such detail, that he'd clearly researched our family history extensively enough to improvise believable additions to our shared past. "Right," I said carefully. "That was a good trip." "The best," Phoenix agreed, his smile warm and convincing. "Some of my clearest memories from before the accident." Before the accident. Another lie, since the fictional camping trip would have occurred years before his disappearance. But he'd woven it seamlessly into his narrative of recovered memories and selective amnesia. "I think I'll hold off on signing today," I announced, setting my pen aside. "I want to review the documents one more time." "Of course, Dad. Whatever makes you comfortable." His voice remained steady, but I noticed his hands tighten almost imperceptibly in his lap. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to my usual lunch meeting, I drove to a small internet cafe in downtown Austin and began researching private investigators who specialized in identity verification and missing persons cases. If Phoenix wasn't my son, I needed to know who was living in my house. And more importantly, I needed to know what had really happened to my real child 12 years ago. Jonas Blake's office occupied the third floor of a nondescript building in downtown Austin, its windows offering a clear view of the state capitol dome. The space was spartanly furnished, just a desk, 2 chairs, and walls lined with certificates and commendations from his 20-year career with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Identity theft involving family members is more common than most people realize, he said, studying the file I'd brought, especially when substantial assets are involved. Helena Rodriguez, the forensic specialist Blake had recommended, spread additional documents across his desk. Her expertise covered DNA analysis, document verification, and what she called deep background reconstruction, the ability to trace someone's true identity even when they'd spent years covering their tracks. The absence of contemporary medical records is significant, Helena noted, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Someone who'd suffered the kind of head trauma your son described would have generated extensive documentation, MRI scans, neurological evaluations, rehabilitation records. The fact that none of this exists suggests the medical history is fabricated. But he showed me scars, I protested, physical evidence of the injuries. Scars can be created, Jonas said bluntly, especially by someone with access to surgical tools and basic medical knowledge. We've seen cases where imposters have deliberately inflicted injuries on themselves to support false narratives. The implications made me feel physically sick. You're saying he might have mutilated himself to fool me? It's possible. People will go to extraordinary lengths when billions of dollars are at stake. We outlined a comprehensive investigation strategy. Phase 1 would establish the imposter's true identity through DNA analysis and fingerprint comparison. Phase 2 would trace the timeline of when the substitution had occurred. Phase 3, and this was the part I dreaded most, would determine what had really happened to my actual son. We'll need covert DNA samples, Helena explained. Hair from his brush, saliva from drinking glasses, anything we can test against samples from your real son's belongings. I kept everything, I said quietly. His bedroom is exactly as he left it. His hairbrush, toothbrush, clothes. I couldn't bear to change anything. That's fortunate. We can run comparison tests that will definitively establish whether this person shares your genetic material. Jonas opened another folder. We'll also run his fingerprints through federal databases. If he's ever been arrested or held a security clearance, we'll know who he really is within 72 hours. There's something else we need to consider, Helena added gravely. If someone has been impersonating your son for 12 years, they've had unprecedented access to your business information, your estate planning documents, your most private family details. This isn't opportunistic fraud. This is the most sophisticated long-term identity theft I've ever encountered. And the weight of that realization settled on me like a lead blanket. 12 years of intimate family moments. 12 years of shared meals, shared secrets, shared plans for the future, all potentially calculated performance designed to position an imposter as my heir. How long will the analysis take? I asked. DNA results will be ready in 48 hours, Helena replied. But the deeper identity work, tracing his real background, understanding how he learned enough about your family to fool you for over a decade, that could take weeks. And in the meantime, act normal, Jonas advised. Don't let on that you suspect anything. We need time to gather evidence before he realizes the investigation is underway. If he panics and runs, we might never learn the truth about what happened to your real son. That night, I sat in my study holding my real Phoenix's college graduation photo, a picture of a young man with bright hazel eyes and an easy, confident smile. The face I'd been looking at across my dinner table for 12 years was similar enough to pass casual inspection, but now that I knew what to look for, the differences were obvious. Someone had studied my son's appearance, mannerisms, and personal history with scientific precision. Then they'd assumed his identity with such skill that they'd fooled his own father for over a decade. The question that kept me awake that night was simple and terrifying. If this imposter was living my son's life, where was my real son? The next morning, I set my trap with the precision of a man who'd spent 50 years reading people and situations in the cutthroat world of Texas energy politics. Over breakfast, our usual ritual of coffee and business discussions, I made my announcement with carefully calculated casualness. Phoenix, I've been thinking about delaying the ownership transfer for a few more months. Maybe doing some additional due diligence on the family history documentation. The imposter's fork paused halfway to his mouth for just a fraction of a second. Then he continued eating as if nothing had happened. Due diligence? Dad, we've been over every document a dozen times. What more could there be to review? Oh, just small details. I thought I might reach out to some of the doctors who treated you after the accident. Get their professional assessment of your cognitive recovery for the legal files. This time the pause was longer and more obvious. The medical records from that period are sealed under patient confidentiality laws. Besides, most of those doctors have probably retired by now. Dr. Peterson is still practicing, I said, naming Phoenix's childhood pediatrician who would have had no involvement in treating adult head trauma. I thought he might have some insights. Dr. Peterson, the imposter's voice carried a note of uncertainty he quickly tried to cover. I don't think he'd have access to any relevant information about adult trauma cases. But my real son would have immediately corrected me about Dr. Peterson's specialization, probably with an affectionate laugh about his old pediatrician. The fact that the imposter had entertained the suggestion, even briefly, was another crack in his carefully constructed facade. You're probably right, I agreed amiably. I'm just being overly cautious in my old age. There's no rush, Dad. Take all the time you need to feel comfortable with the transition. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the unsigned documents sitting on my desk. Whatever timeline he'd been working toward, my delay was disrupting his plans. That afternoon, I watched from my study window as the imposter made a series of urgent phone calls in the back garden. He paced between Margaret's rose bushes, his gestures sharp with what looked like barely controlled anxiety. The recording device Jonas had hidden in my antique mantel clock captured everything when he returned to the house and continued his conversation. "We have a problem," his voice came through with crystal clarity. "The old man is getting cold feet. He wants to delay the transfer and start contacting doctors." A gravelly male voice responded, older, harder, with the flat vowels of East Texas. "Calm down, Royce. You've been playing this role for 12 years without a slip. Don't lose your nerve now." Royce, not Phoenix. The name hit me like a physical blow. "It's not about nerve," the man I'd called my son replied. "It's about exposure. If he starts digging into medical records, he'll discover there aren't any real ones. And if he orders DNA tests, then we move to the backup plan. File for emergency conservatorship. Get him declared mentally incompetent before he can cause trouble." The backup plan. They'd been prepared for this contingency all along. "I've been documenting his confusion and memory lapses for months," Royce continued, "building a case that he's no longer capable of making sound financial decisions." My hands clenched as I realized the full scope of their scheme. Every time I'd misplaced my keys, every moment of normal forgetfulness that comes with age, Royce had been cataloging it as evidence of mental incompetence. "The conservatorship route is messier," the older voice warned. "More lawyers, more scrutiny, higher chance of exposure." "I know, but if the DNA question comes up, we won't have a choice. At least with conservatorship, I can control his access to legal representation." "What about the real son?" There was a long pause before Royce answered. "Still secure, still doesn't remember anything useful from before the conditioning." My vision blurred with rage and terror. The real son. My real Phoenix was alive somewhere, but had been subjected to something called conditioning that had damaged his memories. "Keep him that way," the older voice instructed. "If he ever recovers enough to identify himself, this whole operation falls apart." The conversation ended, but I continued sitting in my study as darkness fell around me. My son was alive, but imprisoned. The man who'd been living in my house, eating my food, calling me dad for 12 years was not only a fraud. He was actively involved in holding my real child captive. The quiet war I'd been planning was about to become something much more personal and much more dangerous. The DNA results, arrived 48 hours later in a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Helena Rodriguez delivered them personally, her expression grim as she spread the laboratory reports across my kitchen table. "Zero probability of paternal relationship," she said without preamble. "The man living in your house shares no genetic material with you whatsoever." Jonas Blake added a thick file folder to the growing pile of evidence. "We've also identified his true identity through fingerprint analysis. Meet Royce Walsh, born 1979 in Beaumont, Texas. Extensive criminal record, including identity theft, financial fraud, kidnapping, and aggravated assault." I stared at the booking photos with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. The bone structure was indeed similar enough to my real son's that surgical modification could have refined the resemblance. But now that I knew what I was looking at, the differences were glaring. "The timeline is particularly disturbing," Helena continued, opening another folder. "Royce Walsh was released from Huntsville Correctional Center on March 10th, 2012, exactly 5 days before your son's disappearance. Now, you think he was targeting Phoenix specifically?" "We know he was," Jonas said, producing surveillance photos that made my stomach turn. "These were taken from a traffic camera near your son's apartment complex in February 2012. Royce Walsh had been stalking Phoenix for at least a month before the kidnapping." The photos showed a man I now knew as Royce Walsh sitting in a beat-up sedan, photographing Phoenix as he came and went from his daily routine. The level of premeditation was chilling. "But why Phoenix? Why my family?" Helena opened a laptop and pulled up a series of documents. Royce Walsh specialized in what criminal psychologists call heir replacement fraud. He would identify wealthy families with only sons, study their targets extensively, then eliminate and replace the heir to inherit the family fortune. Eliminate? In previous cases, the original victims were killed. Your son appears to be the first one Royce kept alive, possibly as insurance in case his impersonation was ever questioned. The thought of Phoenix held captive for 12 years while his identity was stolen was almost too much to process. "Where is he now?" "We're working on that," Jonas said. "The recording you captured mentioned conditioning and memory suppression. We believe your son is being held at a remote location and subjected to psychological manipulation designed to keep him confused and compliant. We need to find him." "We will, but first we need to build an airtight legal case against Royce Walsh and his accomplices. If we move too fast and spook them, they might eliminate your son to cover their tracks." Helena pulled out another set of documents. "There's more. We've identified at least 4 other cases across Texas and Louisiana where Royce Walsh used the same methodology. Wealthy fathers, only sons, mysterious disappearances followed by miraculous returns. Now, were the families fooled? 3 of them, yes, for varying lengths of time before Royce inherited their fortunes and disappeared. The 4th case is particularly relevant. An oil executive in Shreveport whose son returned after a kidnapping, but seemed different. The father grew suspicious and hired investigators. What happened? Jonas's expression darkened. The father was found dead 3 weeks later. Apparent suicide, but the evidence suggests he was murdered. Royce Walsh inherited $12 million and vanished. The implications were clear. Royce wasn't just a sophisticated con artist. He was a killer who eliminated obstacles to his schemes. And I had just become an obstacle. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We wait for him to file the conservatorship papers," Jonas replied. "Based on the recorded conversation, that's his backup plan when the voluntary transfer fails. When he makes that move, we'll be ready with evidence that will expose him completely. In the meantime, we'll work on locating your real son," Helena added. "The psychological conditioning Royce mentioned suggests a long-term holding facility with medical capabilities. We're checking abandoned psychiatric hospitals, remote medical facilities, anywhere that could house a long-term prisoner without attracting attention." That evening, I sat across from Royce at dinner, watching him perform his role of loving, concerned son. Every gesture was perfectly calibrated, every expression carefully modulated to project familial affection. But I could see him differently now. The predator beneath the mask. the calculating intelligence that had studied my family like a academic subject before destroying it from within. "How was your day, Dad?" he asked, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Productive," I replied, thinking about the evidence files sitting in my safe. "Very productive indeed." "Good. I worry about you working too hard at your age." At your age? The phrase carried a subtle threat now that I understood his backup plan. But Royce Walsh had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that a 75-year-old man would be helpless against his manipulation. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 5 decades outmaneuvering some of the most ruthless operators in the Texas energy business. And most importantly, he'd underestimated how far a father would go to save his son. Royce's next move came with the speed and precision of someone who'd been planning contingencies for years. The legal papers arrived by certified mail 3 days later. Petition for emergency conservatorship in the matter of Zachary Montague, an alleged incapacitated person. The supporting documentation was professionally crafted and deeply disturbing. Medical affidavits describing progressive cognitive decline and dangerous memory lapses, financial analyses suggesting erratic business decisions that threatened the family fortune, witness statements from unnamed individuals claiming to have observed concerning behavioral changes. All of it fabricated, but presented with the kind of clinical precision that could convince a busy probate judge to grant the requested relief. I called Jonas immediately. "He's made his move. We're ready," Jonas assured me. "Helena has prepared comprehensive counter-documentation, and we've been building profiles on everyone involved in this conspiracy. But there's something else you need to know about the legal team representing Royce." "What is it?" "Morrison, Clark, and Associates have been involved in every one of Royce's previous cases. They're not just his lawyers. They're full partners in the conspiracy. The firm specializes in elder law, but their real business is facilitating heir replacement fraud across the Southwest." The scope of the criminal organization was larger than I'd imagined. "How many families have they targeted?" "At least 12 that we can document over the past 15 years. Combined theft approaching $200 million. But you're the biggest target they've ever attempted." "What about the witnesses who signed affidavits about my alleged mental incompetence?" "Professional actors and small-time criminals who specialize in providing false testimony. We've identified 3 of them from previous cases. They're paid to appear in court as concerned neighbors or family friends who've observed the alleged victim's declining condition." That afternoon brought another shock. The court had assigned Dr. Margaret Lawson to conduct my psychological evaluation, supposedly an independent assessment to determine my mental capacity. But Jonas's research revealed that Dr. Lawson had been involved in 4 previous conservatorship cases connected to Morrison, Clark, and Associates. "She's not independent," Helena explained during an emergency meeting in my study. "She's part of the network. Her evaluations always support the conservatorship petitions, regardless of the alleged victim's actual mental state." "So the hearing is rigged?" "It was designed to be, but we have advantages they don't know about. Judge Patricia Williams is overseeing the case, and she's got a reputation for thorough investigation of conservatorship fraud. More importantly, she'll allow us to present evidence about Royce's true identity before ruling on his petition." The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, 5 days to prepare for what would either be my vindication or my legal imprisonment. If Royce succeeded in having me declared incompetent, he would gain complete control over my person and my assets. I would be confined to a nursing facility while he looted everything my family had built. But I had one advantage he didn't know about: the recorded conversations proving his identity and revealing the location where my real son was being held. "There's something else," Jonas said, producing a new file. "We've located the facility where we believe your son is being held." My heart stopped. "Where?" "A defunct psychiatric hospital about 60 miles northwest of Austin. It was abandoned in 2008, but recent satellite imagery shows signs of current occupation. Vehicles, power lines that have been reconnected, security modifications to the buildings. We need to go there now." "No," Helena said firmly. "If we attempt a rescue before neutralizing Royce and his organization, They'll kill your son and disappear. We have to play this through the legal system first. But what if your son has survived 12 years in captivity? Jonas interrupted gently. He can survive one more week while we end this properly. But if we spook them now, he dies. And the logical part of my mind knew they were right. But the father in me wanted to drive to that hospital immediately and bring Phoenix home, regardless of the consequences. Friday's hearing will determine everything, Helena continued. If we can expose Royce's true identity and present evidence of the conspiracy, the judge will not only deny the conservatorship, she'll order his arrest and authorize a rescue operation for your son. That evening, I sat across from Royce at what I knew would be our final dinner together as supposed father and son. He was relaxed, confident, already mentally spending the billions he thought he was about to steal. The hearing on Friday is just a formality, he assured me with what I now recognized as practiced sincerity. Once the court confirms that you need protection, I'll make sure you're comfortable and well cared for. That's what family does for each other. Family? The word felt like acid in my mouth. I know you will, son, I replied, playing my role of confused elderly father one final time. I trust you completely. Royce's smile was radiant with anticipated victory. He had no idea that in 4 days he would be facing a life sentence for kidnapping, identity theft, financial fraud, and conspiracy. More importantly, he had no idea that his 12-year reign of terror was about to end with the reunion of a father and his real son. Friday morning dawned clear and cold in Austin, the kind of crisp December day that usually lifted my spirits. Instead, I felt the weight of 12 years of deception pressing down on me as I walked into the Travis County Courthouse. Royce sat at the plaintiff's table beside his attorney from Morrison, Clark & Associates, a sharp-dressed man named Bradley Morrison, whose expensive suit couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. They'd brought 3 boxes of fabricated evidence and a witness list designed to paint me as a confused old man desperately in need of protection from my own failing mind. At the defense table, my attorney, Catherine Mills, was arranging her own evidence files with calm precision. Beside her, Jonas Blake and Helena Rodriguez sat ready to present the most comprehensive exposure of criminal conspiracy the Travis County courts had ever witnessed. Judge Patricia Williams called the hearing to order at 9 a.m. sharp. A stern woman in her 50s with piercing blue eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, she had a reputation for thorough examination of evidence and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. This court will hear the petition for emergency conservatorship filed by Phoenix Montague concerning his father, Zachary Montague, she announced. Mr. Morrison, you may present your case. Bradley Morrison rose with theatrical solemnity. Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking case of cognitive decline in an elderly man who has lost the capacity to protect himself from financial predators and his own increasingly poor judgment. For the next 90 minutes, Morrison presented his fabricated evidence with professional polish. Dr. Margaret Lawson testified about my alleged mental deterioration, citing supposed memory tests and cognitive assessments I had never actually taken. The hired witnesses described concerning incidents of confusion and paranoia that had never occurred. The medical documentation was impressive. Brain scans, neurological reports, psychiatric evaluations, all suggesting progressive dementia that threatened both my safety and my ability to manage a complex business empire. It was skillfully crafted fiction, but utterly convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Then Catherine Mills rose to present our defense. Your Honor, before we address the question of Mr. Montague's mental capacity, we must first examine a more fundamental issue: the petitioner's legal standing to file this petition at all. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. Explain. The man sitting at that table claims to be Phoenix Montague, Mr. Montague's son and legal heir. However, scientific evidence proves conclusively that he is not related to my client in any way. His true name is Royce Walsh, and he has been perpetrating the most sophisticated identity theft in Texas criminal history. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Morrison leaped to his feet with furious objections. Royce himself went pale, his carefully maintained mask of filial concern finally cracking. Furthermore, Catherine continued over the disruption, we have evidence that this conservatorship petition is part of a criminal conspiracy involving multiple victims across the Southwest, orchestrated by individuals who specialize in targeting elderly men with substantial assets. Judge Williams banged her gavel for order. These are extremely serious allegations. I'll hear your evidence. What followed was the systematic demolition of everything Royce Walsh had built over 12 years of careful deception. Helena Rodriguez testified first, her voice steady and professional as she presented the DNA analysis. Genetic testing proves zero familial relationship between the petitioner and Mr. Montague. Fingerprint analysis confirms the petitioner's true identity as Royce Walsh, born 1979, with an extensive criminal record, including identity theft, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. Dr. Patricia Chen, the court's independent psychiatric evaluator, took the stand next. I conducted a comprehensive psychological assessment of Mr. Montague yesterday afternoon. He demonstrates complete cognitive function across all tested parameters. His memory is exceptional, his judgment sound, and his decision-making process entirely rational. I found no evidence whatsoever of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any cognitive impairment. Then Jonas Blake presented the broader criminal conspiracy. Financial investigation reveals that Morrison, Clark & Associates has been involved in at least 12 similar cases over 15 years. In each instance, elderly men with substantial assets were targeted by criminals claiming to be missing or deceased family members. But the most devastating evidence was yet to come. We also have recorded conversations between the petitioner and his accomplices, planning this fraudulent conservatorship and discussing what they called the real son. The recording filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. Royce's voice, unmistakably discussing the backup plan. If he orders DNA tests, we move to conservatorship, get him declared mentally incompetent before he can cause trouble. The older man's voice responding, "What about the real son?" And Royce's chilling reply, "Still secure. Still doesn't remember anything useful from before the conditioning." The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Williams studied Royce with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Walsh, you are in contempt of this court for filing fraudulent documents under false identity. I'm ordering your immediate arrest on charges of identity theft, elder fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy." As the bailiff approached Royce, Catherine delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, we have one more critical matter. We believe Mr. Montague's real son is being held captive at a facility northwest of Austin. We request immediate authorization for law enforcement to conduct a rescue operation." Judge Williams looked directly at me. "Mr. Montague, is there anything you'd like to say to this court?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 12 years of grief and deception on my shoulders. "Your Honor, I just want my son back. My real son. Whatever it takes to bring him home safely." "Granted," the judge said firmly. "I'm issuing an emergency warrant for the search and rescue operation. Mr. Walsh, you're going to tell us exactly where Phoenix Montague is being held, or you'll face additional charges of accessory to kidnapping and false imprisonment." Royce's composure finally shattered completely. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with something that might have been respect. "The Millfield facility," he said quietly. 60 miles northwest on Highway 290. He's in the East Wing, second floor. The words I'd been waiting 12 years to hear. My son was alive, and I was finally going to bring him home. The drive to the abandoned Millfield Psychiatric Hospital took 45 minutes through rolling Texas hill country that looked deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. I sat in the passenger seat of Jonas Blake's SUV, following a convoy of sheriff's deputies and FBI agents authorized by Judge Williams' emergency warrant. Helena Rodriguez monitored radio communications from the back seat, relaying updates from the tactical team that had been deployed ahead of us. They've confirmed signs of recent occupation, vehicles in the parking area, power lines reconnected to the main building, 3 individuals taken into custody so far. My hands trembled as I stared at the approaching complex, A sprawling collection of brick buildings surrounded by overgrown grounds and rusted chain-link fencing. Somewhere inside those walls, my son had spent 12 years as a prisoner in his own life. What did Royce mean by conditioning? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Psychological manipulation designed to fragment memory and create dependency, Jonas explained grimly. It's a technique developed by intelligence agencies for controlling prisoners long term. The victim's sense of identity is systematically destroyed and replaced with a constructed narrative that keeps them compliant. Will Phoenix remember me? That depends on how extensively they've damaged his memories, but the mind has remarkable resilience. Sometimes familiar voices or faces can trigger breakthrough moments, even after years of conditioning. The convoy pulled into the hospital's cracked parking lot, where FBI agents had established a command post. Special Agent Maria Santos briefed us quickly. We've secured the perimeter and neutralized the three-person security team. No resistance. They were apparently caught off guard by the speed of the operation. What about Phoenix? We've located him in the East Wing, exactly where Walsh indicated. He's alive and conscious, but... She paused, choosing her words carefully. He seems confused about his identity. The medical staff they had treating him claims he suffers from severe traumatic amnesia. I want to see him. We need to prepare you for what you might find, Agent Santos said gently. 12 years of psychological manipulation leaves marks. He may not recognize you initially. He may not even remember being Phoenix Montague. The walk through the hospital corridors felt like the longest journey of my life. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on walls, covered with peeling paint and graffiti. The smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of decay and neglect. We climbed a staircase to the second floor, where FBI agents stood guard outside a room that had been converted into what could only be described as a comfortable prison cell. Medical equipment lined the walls. A hospital bed sat in the center, surrounded by monitoring devices that suggested continuous pharmaceutical management of the occupant. He's been sedated regularly, Agent Santos explained, part of the conditioning protocol. We've had medical personnel evaluate him, and the drugs should be clearing his system within hours. I stepped into the room and felt my heart stop. The man lying on the hospital bed was unmistakably my son. Older, thinner, marked by years of captivity, but undeniably Phoenix. His hair was longer than I remembered, streaked with premature gray. His face showed the pallor of someone who hadn't seen natural sunlight in years, but his eyes, his beautiful hazel eyes, were exactly as I remembered them. "Phoenix?" I said softly, approaching the bed slowly. His eyes focused on me with effort, blinking slowly as if trying to clear away fog. I know you," he said, his voice hoarse from years of limited use. "But I can't. The doctor said my memory—" "I'm your father," I said, reaching out to touch his hand. "Your name is Phoenix Montague. You're 39 years old. You were kidnapped 12 years ago, but you're safe now." Phoenix studied my face with the intense concentration of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Father," he repeated slowly, as if testing the word. Yes, I remember. Coffee in the morning. Business reports. You taught me about oil markets and environmental regulations." "That's right." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Do you remember our house? Your mother Margaret's rose garden?" "Mom," his eyes brightened slightly. "She died when I was 21. Cancer. You were so sad for so long." "Yes, but you helped me through it. You've always been my strength, Phoenix." For several minutes we sat together as fragments of memory surfaced through the pharmaceutical fog that had clouded his mind for over a decade. Each recovered detail felt like a small miracle. Birthdays, holidays, business trips we'd taken together, conversations about his future in the company. "There was another man," Phoenix said suddenly, his voice gaining strength. "He looked like me. They made me watch videos of him pretending to be me. They said he was my replacement, living my life while I was sick. Royce Walsh. He's been arrested. He can't hurt you anymore." 12 years? Phoenix whispered, the full scope of his lost time beginning to sink in. He stole 12 years of my life. Yes, but we're going to get the rest of it back. Together. The medical team determined that Phoenix could be safely transported to a proper hospital for comprehensive evaluation and treatment. As we prepared to leave the facility that had been his prison, he paused at the window overlooking the grounds. I used to watch the seasons change through this window, he said quietly. It was the only way I could tell time was passing. Spring, summer, fall, winter. 12 times I watched the leaves change, wondering if I'd ever see home again. You're going home now, I promised, and this time, no one will ever take you away from me again. The ride back to Austin was quiet, Phoenix sleeping fitfully in the medical transport, while I held his hand and tried to process the magnitude of what we'd endured and overcome. Royce Walsh had stolen 12 years from both of us, but he hadn't stolen our future. That was still ours to reclaim. 6 months later, I stood in the offices of the Phoenix Montague Memorial Foundation, watching my son, my real son, review architectural plans for our new headquarters. The foundation would focus on protecting families from identity theft and supporting survivors of long-term psychological manipulation. Phoenix's recovery had been remarkable but incomplete. The 12 years of pharmaceutical conditioning had damaged some of his memories permanently, but his core personality and intelligence had remained intact. With intensive therapy and rehabilitation, he'd regained most of his cognitive function and was slowly rebuilding his identity as a free man. The residential treatment wing should be larger, he said, marking changes on the blueprints with the same careful attention to detail he'd always brought to important projects. People who've been through what I experienced need longer-term support to fully reintegrate into normal life. The criminal trial had revealed the full scope of Royce Walsh's organization. Over 15 years, he and his accomplices had successfully defrauded 14 families across the Southwest, stealing a combined total of nearly $300 million. 5 elderly victims had died under suspicious circumstances when they'd grown too suspicious of their supposed family members. Royce himself had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for kidnapping, identity theft, fraud, and multiple counts of murder. His accomplices received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. The law firm of Morrison, Clark and Associates had been disbanded, its partners facing federal racketeering charges for their role in facilitating the systematic elder fraud conspiracy. But the most important victory was personal. Phoenix was home, alive, and slowly healing from his ordeal. I've been thinking about the company's succession again, I said, joining him at the drafting table. But this time, I want to make sure you're ready for it, not just legally eligible for it. Phoenix smiled, the same warm, genuine smile I remembered from his childhood. Dad, I've had 12 years to think about what I want to do with my life. Building something that protects other families from what we went through feels more important than drilling for oil. The company will always be there when you're ready for it, I assured him. But you're right. This foundation work feels like our real legacy now. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a portrait we'd commissioned of Royce Walsh's victims, 14 elderly men who'd lost their lives or life savings to identity theft. At the center of the memorial wall was a quote Phoenix had chosen: "The truth may be delayed, but it can never be destroyed." That evening, we sat together on the front porch of our family home, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in 12 years, I was sharing this daily ritual with my actual son. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that text message?" Phoenix asked. "Every day, but I've learned not to dwell on alternate histories. We have the truth now, and we have each other. That's enough." "More than enough," Phoenix agreed. "It's everything." As darkness fell over the Texas hill country, I reflected on the lessons of our ordeal. Love makes us vulnerable to manipulation, but it also gives us the strength to fight back when we discover we've been deceived. Trust is a precious gift, but it must be verified when something feels wrong. Most importantly, I'd learned that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected by patience, preparation, and the quiet determination of those who refuse to let evil triumph. If you're listening to this story and something about it resonates with your own family situation, if there are inconsistencies you've ignored, changes you've explained away, or gut feelings you've suppressed, trust your instincts. The truth has a way of revealing itself to those who have the courage to look for it. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because somewhere out there, another family is being targeted by predators who specialize in exploiting our deepest bonds of love and trust. And remember, blood may be thicker than water, but truth is thicker than blood. Never stop seeking it, no matter how much it might hurt to find it. The quiet wars fought in courtrooms and hospital rooms can be just as decisive as any battle fought with weapons. Sometimes the most important victory is simply bringing your loved ones home,